Thanks everyone for joining us for the webinar this morning on MotioCI, the new version launch in Australia. So my name is Piers Wilson from Cornerstone. I'm the sales director. We've also got on the webinar this morning two folks from Motio, Edwin, who's the global partner manager director for Motio worldwide, and Roger Moore, who's the Motio product manager for MotioCI. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll get started. So the agenda for this morning, I'm just going to give you a quick overview on Motio and Cornerstone, a look at all of Motio's solutions, and then get a deep dive into MotioCI, and a particular look at some of the new features with a demo from Roger. We'll have plenty of time for some Q&A at the end. If you do have any questions during the presentation, if you could please just send them as a chat message to the presenter, and we'll address those as we go. Otherwise, we'll open up the line at the end for questions. So just a brief introduction to Cornerstone. So we are Motio's distributor in Australia and New Zealand. We have been since 2010. We're also an IBM Premier Business Partner, so we sell, implement and support IBM's business analytics solutions, which include Cognos, TM1, SPSS. Some of the organisations that we're working with Motio in Australia include Wesfarmers Insurance, Allianz, Westpac, UTS. Also, it's worth noting that IBM themselves actually use the Motio solution globally to manage their own internal reporting environment for Cognos as well. So Motio has a number of solutions, and they're typically across common BI issues and questions. So, for example, one of the issues you might be experiencing at the moment with your environment is you need to, for example, migrate to your BI environment to 64-bit, and Access Manager is only supported on 32-bit. Well, Motio has a comprehensive security solution that allows you to migrate your namespaces from one environment to the other very easily. They also have a great product called Persona IQ, which allows you to, which is really a layer in between your LDAP security and allows you to manage your security more easily, in effect replacing Access Manager. Another common business intelligence issue is you need to make bulk changes to reports. So as an administrator of your BI environment, you might need to search your content store to find a number of reports that contain a particular element to change the security on it, or to change an image, or to change a particular element within the report. So without opening every single report and making that change, Motio provides a solution to search your entire content store, find a list of all the reports or all the objects that contain that element, and make a bulk change to that, and that's called MotioCI, of which there is a free version and a professional version available. The next common business intelligence issue that Motio helps solve is organisations that are looking to upgrade their environment. So, for example, you might be on 8.4 and looking to upgrade to 10.2. You might have hundreds, thousands of reports that you need to analyse and understand before you complete that upgrade process to really understand, filter down which reports and objects you might upgrade. So one of the things that another solution that Motio provides is called Report Card, that not only documents your current reporting environment, but also through a number of business rules, actually will score and rate your reports, and also show the commonalities between those reports, so show reports that are duplicated across your BI environment, which is an essential part of an upgrade process. Another common BI issue is wanting to enhance another application or integrate by integrating your BI environment into that. So that could be a call center or a CRM system, a web system that you want to integrate your BI environment into it. So Motio has an application development framework that allows customization and working with the SDK to easily allow that integration with your other applications. And lastly, and I guess this is the crux of the webinar today. So, one of the most common issues that people are faced with their Cognos BI environments is being able to actively monitor and understand what changes are occurring in that environment, whether that's within a single environment, within your development environment or production environment, or across environments. So between those environments, as you migrate between those two. So not only understanding what's changed, but who changed it and what the impact is of that change. And secondly, ensuring before you promote content or as you're developing content that anything that you migrate or promote between those environments, A, the data is correct, and B, it'll perform efficiently within that environment and within service level agreements that you might have within your business. And that solution that Motio provides is MotioCI and what we're going to delve into today. So those are I think the five key products, and as I mentioned, we're going to delve now into CI. So I'll hand over to Edwin to talk through the MotioCI component.
Well, thank you very much, Piers, for the introduction and to go through the products we have. If we look at MotioCI, we look at the life cycle of BI components. And normally when you start working and your organization has a demand for information, to say, well, I need this information to steer or to control the performance of my organization, and could you deliver that information to me? Well, the BI department will start with defining the information and then describing what you will need. And the next step will be, if that's agreed on, to develop the BI content in IBM Cognos, for instance. Well, after developing, of course, you have to just test it, and when it's all okay, you will deploy it to production. And after a while, the manager will say, well, this is great information, this is perfect, but I need something else, but I need something more. And then the cycle starts again. And during this cycle, we try to automate certain tasks, and we try to make life easier in the development phase and automate several steps. And that's what we're going to show today. And before we go into deep, I want to talk a little bit about the architectural design of our products. The report author will work in IBM Cognos as normally. He will open up his reports, he will make changes, he will do a save, he will do all kinds of things, and all he is doing will be saved in the content store. And what MotioCI will do is we'll tap that save and put it in a separate database. And so you will see what is happening in time with all aspects of IBM Cognos. We can put it in time, and we can also push that back and start several processes in IBM Cognos. And that makes us fully in control over the IBM Cognos environment without the report author really changing his way of working. Okay, what are the key features of MotioCI and what are we going to show today? Of course, it starts with version control. Make sure that every change is captured and we can put it in time so you can see what has changed over time by who. And another important feature is that we have a check-in, check-out mechanism. So that if you start working on a report, somebody else could also start working on that report if you don't have your check-in, check-out. Now you can check out the report, and so it's blocked for other users. Then we have testing. Testing as a smoke detector, telling you that something is wrong in your environment. It could be performance, but it could also be that a report is not working anymore. But also testing on performance and stress testing. And an important feature is make your own test assertions and make sure that you can test whatever you want to test. Important is also deployment, bringing content from one environment to the other. That could be scheduled or manual, centralized or decentralized, exactly the way you want to have it. Another important feature is documentation, and especially the lineage of data, the lineage of objects, and what is related to what, and not only in one environment, but also cross environments. And I think that's a very important feature for compliance and to show how changes are being made in your BI environment. And the last feature will be integration with ticket systems. Okay, well, some of you who are attending this webinar are already using MotioCI. That could be the cloud version, or that could be the version in your own location. But what is changing in Motio version 3? What's new? Well, what we did is we focused on completeness, so we made sure that all objects are being versioned. And further, we also make sure that there is flexibility for you. So you could create your own assertions and compare outputs across environments and across type of output. And further, we have improved the analyzing capabilities, so you can look what the causes of test that fails. For instance, look at the outputs, look at the HTML, but also look at the generated SQL. And another important change what we made is that we integrated the testing functionality with the promotion functionality. In the circle, what I showed you, in the process I showed you, the lifecycle management process, we said, well, you develop, you test, you promote. But also I can imagine that during your promotion, you want to be sure that it's working in your environment. Or during your development, you want to be sure that what you are developing is working correctly. Well, that's what we also offer in this new version 3, and we will show you that today. All right, enough talking, I guess. So I want to hand over to Roger Moore, and Roger, the product manager of MotioCI, will show you the tool.
All right, thank you, Edwin. So I went ahead and shared my desktop, and I've loaded MotioCI in my web browser here. And so hopefully you all should be looking at the MotioCI application. If for some reason you're not, please come into the chat window and let someone know, and we'll make sure we get that straightened out. I understand we have kind of a mixed audience today. We've got some people that have used that are users of MotioCI and have used prior versions of the product, and some people who are new to the product altogether. So I'll try to point out some of the new features, but also be sure that I'm giving a comprehensive overview of the product so that the people who are new will be able to follow along. So one of the things that Edwin was talking about, sort of overall architecture, we do version and test all of the different objects in IBM Cognos, and a single installation of MotioCI can monitor, version, and test multiple Cognos environments. So you can see I have set up here a development environment, I have a testing environment, a production environment, and a production disaster recovery environment. I'll work through these and show you some of the different things that are available in these environments, ultimately testing some content, versioning some content, and promoting content from one environment to the other. On the right-hand side, you will see my test projects. You can see by looking at these that some of my test projects are succeeding. Therefore, we have the sunshine here. Some have warnings, and some have errors. And so, of course, you can immediately see where in your BI environment you have issues and where you don't. And, beyond just this dashboard, of course, you'll be getting an email that says, oh, we've detected a problem with this particular object. And that's all part of our automated testing. One of the things, and I know this was mentioned earlier in the webinar, that we've done for the MotioCI 3.0 release is expand on our testing and to allow testing of more object types. So we've always allowed testing against executable content like reports, but now you can literally author a test case against any object in Cognos, and this includes folders, packages, different administrative objects. So I'm going to go ahead and drill down into this admin folder and take a look at some of the things that are happening here in my administrative project that may be of a concern to me. For one thing, I've got a warning. So as far as the warning is concerned, it's telling me that my dispatchers don't have the same settings. So somebody's gone in and edited the high affinity connections on the dispatcher, on one of the dispatchers, but not on the other one. Therefore, it's giving me a warning about that. And you can actually control whether that's a warning, whether it's info, or whether it's an error. So that's one of the problems that I'm seeing here. If I close that and look, there's a failure, and it's failing because one of my dispatchers is in the standby mode. So we can actually test all of your dispatchers, make sure they're up, make sure they're running, make sure they're doing useful work, and actually alert you if there's a problem. We can do the same thing with your data sources. So let's say you have 10, 15, 20 data sources in Cognos, and you want to verify that Cognos can connect to those various data sources. Well, we can set up a test case for that and ultimately verify that your data sources are operational. I'm going to close this and back up and look at one of the projects that has some issues with reports and packages and other things like that. So we've got, if I open up this Acme Go Sales project, you'll notice a few things. The first thing that you're going to notice is that a few of the test cases are in the stale state, and that just means that the object has changed since the test case was last executed. So, anytime an object is changed, you don't know if it's in a good state or a bad state. You need to go ahead and run the test cases again before you would actually know. We can select these and run them straight away in order to find out if they would pass or fail, but we don't have to do this because the test cases run on a time basis. And typically the way you set up your environment is you might want to say, I want all of my test cases to run overnight, but I want the ones that failed or are stale to run more frequently, maybe every hour, every 2 hours, something of this nature. So you can configure those to run. Let's go ahead and look at some of the failures that we've detected. We've got a test case or a set of test cases set up on one of our containers on a package, and we can see that some of our rules are passing. For example, we've got some rules around the policy set, but one is failing. So we have a rule in our environment that says that only containers like packages and folders should have policy sets on them, not individual objects like reports or queries or other things like this. So this is actually failing because this particular report has a custom policy set. So we can detect that, and you can define your own rules and set up whatever sort of things you want around your security, so we can actually test your security that may be defined on your folders, on your packages, on your reports, and validate that it is correct. Again, this is something that was added as part of the 3.0 release, the ability to test all objects and all properties of those objects. So not just the reports and the report outputs, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute, but all the other properties, whether that's policy sets or maybe that's names. If you want to have a rule that says all of my objects must have a name in these 3 locales, you could test that and make sure that they actually do comply with that particular standard. So let's close out of this and take a look at a couple of things around a report. So this is a banded report, and it's failed, and let's take a look at why. It's failed because there's an absolute image path. So, a fairly common problem that you'll see is people put in absolute image paths to icons and things that they want to reference, and that looks fine. They run it, it looks great, it works great. It works great until that report is moved on to the production server, and maybe, they're not even on the same network or something, and that URL doesn't resolve, and therefore it's broken. What you want to do is make sure you have relative URLs and not absolute URLs. So we have a rule to that effect, and that's been detected. So we can actually test any properties on the report, things like the names, description, the policy set, as well as the specification. So we can say So we don't want to have embedded SQL, no native SQL in our reports or something like that. And we can set that to be a failure or a warning or info, and we can specify, a whole series of other things that we may want to check within the specification to make sure that the reports are in compliance with our standards. Beyond just standards, we do execute the objects if they're executable types like a report, and we look at the SQL that Cognos generates and allow you to make tests or assertions on the SQL. So here we have one that says, there should not be any outer joins in the SQL that Cognos generates, and if there are, maybe I want to be alerted to that. We also can look at the execution time, and if the execution time is increased by 10% or 15% above our baseline or above our expectation, then maybe we want to consider that a failure. Both of these are actually successful in this case. And we can also look at the output. Here we have a problem with the output. The output is different from our baseline, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. And we can see that we have an expected output on the left, our so-called master copy or gold copy. We have our current run on the right, and you can see that this column and this one don't match. And that's why they're highlighted here in yellow and ultimately flagged as a potential issue. And we actually have a number of different ways to do data validation. This is what we call the output stability assertion, meaning that the output should be the same as when we baselined it. So you can kind of imagine a scenario where you've got 50 reports and you find a problem with one of them and you change the model and you want to make sure you correct that report, but you don't adversely affect the other 49. This output stability assertion can help you with that scenario and ultimately validating that you haven't introduced a problem. We have some other ways to do data validation. One of the most effective ways is that you can actually select a portion of the output, whether that's a report or query or other output, and compare that to the result of a SQL query. So compare that to a SQL that may be run against your transactional system or your data warehouse. And that's an effective way to do testing. We have some other methods like Excel assertions where you can do Excel formulas. So a number of different ways to test the data. Okay? So now that we've taken a look at some of the failures, let's go ahead and pop into Cognos and we'll take a look at some of the version control features, as well as we'll go ahead and correct these issues and go ahead and run the test cases again and verify that we fixed the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and pop into Cognos Connection and actually let me navigate back up here to the root. One of the things that you will notice next to every object in Cognos is an icon that's not normally there, and it's the ability to see the history of the object. And it doesn't matter what the object type is, whether that's a package, a folder, a data source, a query. We keep a complete history of that object. So I'm going to go ahead and pop open the history on this folder, and you'll actually see that the folder was edited in January by myself, Roger, and we can see that we changed a couple of properties on it. Let's go ahead and make a small edit to this folder. So let's give the query users let's just give them write access and set policy access, and go ahead and change the policy set on that particular folder. And now let's open that history again. And if we look at it, we'll see that there's a new revision. Today's date and time. It's actually quite late in the evening here in the States. So you can see that we do have a new revision, and we have a comment with the policy set that changed. If I highlight these last two revisions and compare them, you can see exactly what change was introduced. We can see that in version 2, the query users did not have write access or set policy access, and in version 3, they do. So from an audit perspective, from a governance and risk perspective, anytime somebody changes a property on an object, that will be versioned. You will know exactly what change was made, you'll know who made it ultimately, and you can undo the change if it's not appropriate. So you can undo it. You can also promote it. So if you wanted to take this change and move it up to your test environment, you could simply hit the promote button and move that up. Or if you want to undo it, you simply hit the revert and ultimately run the revert and put the folder back to the state it was when we began the demo. Okay. And this again, all right, so that's completed. Let's go ahead and return to Cognos. Let's go ahead and drill down into the sales folder. You'll remember this banded report. That's the report that we had a couple of different test cases that we're failing against. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in Report Studio, and we'll make some corrections to that particular report. You will notice, similar to Cognos Connection, that we have a couple of integration points here within Report Studio. One of the things is the ability to lock the report. So let's go ahead and check that report out, which will give me a lock to it so that no one else can edit it until I'm done. If you have, just Cognos natively without MotioCI, you're kind of at risk of two authors saving over each other's changes. Because if author 1 opens the report and author 2 opens it, and the first one saves and the second one saves, the second one's going to override the first one's change. So it's kind of whoever saves last wins. With this check-in, check-out process, you actually prevent that possibility because one person keeps the report locked till they're done with it, and then they release it, and then the next person picks up the report and edits. And there's actually some nice messaging that occurs between the two users. If I open the report and lock it, and then Edwin opens the report, he'll get a message that says, this report is locked by Roger. If I save it, he'll get a message that says, you're looking at a stale copy. Do you want to reload the report? That type of thing. So that's the locking feature and the check-in, check-out process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. The other item that you see here is that history, and this is exactly the same as we got from Cognos Connection. When we popped that open on the folder a minute ago, we can pop that open the report and see who edited it, when they edited. We'll actually open that in a minute. But the thing I want to kind of draw your attention to is the test cases. This is something new that we've done recently, is to bring the testing directly into the studio and kind of encourage a test-driven approach from your authors where you can see exactly which test cases are succeeding or failing, and if they'd all been successful, this icon would actually be green, but you can see it's red. If we hover over it, it tells us exactly how many test cases are failing. If we pop it open, we can see which test cases are failing. We've already looked at these. These are the two, the one with the absolute image reference and the revenue column that were incorrect. So we'll be able to correct those in just a minute and verify that they are successful. But we can edit, so we could click here and then edit any test case. We can run test cases if we want to run them again. We can generate new ones, we can add them, we can delete them. So we can fully manage the testing for this report directly from Report Studio. And I think that's a significant advantage in kind of driving up the level of testing that you have and ultimately trying to encourage an approach where people use testing to kind of drive and ultimately define how the development is being done. I want to pop over to the history and take a look at the history of this report because we've seen a couple of problems with it. I want to figure out exactly what those issues are and maybe how they got introduced. One of the things, again, we can see that this report was edited January 25th by Andrea. She's referenced a defect here, so we do integrate with third-party issue tracking systems, defect tracking systems like Jira, HP Quality Center, systems such as this, and you can reference those things. But there's kind of a curious comment here that she says she doubled the revenue. So I'm going to highlight the last two revisions of this report and dip them. You'll recall that we did the side-by-side view with the folder. Let's go ahead and do the inline view. And we can see exactly what change that Andrea made. She did, in fact, double the revenue, and I think it's quite clear what our problem is with this report. Kind of a silly example, but we try to do this just to keep it real simple for everybody to understand as part of the presentation. So I'll be able to correct that real easily. So you can compare any two revisions of the same object, as I've done with the folder and as I've done now with the report. You can also compare different objects like report A and report B, folder A, folder B. And there are good use cases where you might want to do that. If you have two reports and they report over the same data, but one is performing much better than the other and you're trying to figure out, why that might be, diffing them may help you solve that quickly. Or if you've got things that are very similar and you think that you maybe can merge them, being able to compare them can help you make that decision. So you can compare two revisions of the same object or of different objects. You can also compare the properties and specification. You can compare the outputs. You can also compare the SQL that was used to generate the outputs between any two revisions of the same object or between different objects. So you can see here the SQL is different and it correlates pretty well with the specification. You can also compare across environments. So if you want to take a particular revision in dev and compare that to something in production, you can do that. And there are some good use cases for needing to do this. One of the most common things is that things are working in one environment and not working in another, and you're trying to determine exactly what the differences are. Another kind of common case is that you need to do a hot fix, and you want to make a small change to the report and push it out quickly, but you'd like to verify exactly what you're introducing into the production environment, and so you can go ahead and diff that. We've got another feature. Our impact analysis will actually help you with that use case quite a bit, but we can see here that we've got the exact same difference that we were looking at before between the two revisions in dev. We have the similar difference between dev and production. So there's a number of reasons to do that type of diffing. So now that we've got kind of some good information here, we know what's causing the problem with the revenue. We know that our test cases are failing. Let's go ahead and make those changes in Report Studio. So let's go ahead and make this image a relative URL, which is a pretty simple change. And let's go ahead and correct our query calculation that's incorrect. So let's go ahead and fix up that query calculation. Now we're ready to save our work. We can hit save, and certainly that works fine, and that's pretty much what we've always done. But let's assume for the moment that this is the only changes we want to make, and we want to save it to the content store, but also release the lock so that other people can edit this particular report. So let's go ahead and hit the check-in, which will do that. It actually pops up a nice dialog, gives me the opportunity to put in a comment to document what I've done. So I can say I corrected the revenue. I can also reference a issue or defect if we have a system that we're tracking those in. So I can say fixes number 7. What we do is we parse this comment and we look for keywords like fixes, references, closes, and the issue number, and we tie those together on the back end. So it actually works really easily for a report author. And then you're going to notice something if you're a previous user of our system. You're going to notice a couple of new items here where I can actually generate new test cases. So maybe something changed and I need to generate some new test cases based off of the changes that were made. Or I want to just maybe go ahead and run the existing test cases and see did I in fact correct the issues that I expected to correct. So it's real easy for the report author to make a change, document that change, and ultimately rerun the test cases to be sure that the change corrected things, corrected what it was supposed to correct and did not break anything that it obviously wasn't supposed to break. It takes a minute or two for these test cases to run. You'll see them go through a few different states like validating the report, ultimately executing the report, and eventually they will go to the successful state. While they're running, I'll go ahead and take a look at one of the other tabs that we have here, and that's the References tab. So as we version the objects in Cognos, we keep track of how they relate to one another. So we can look at the dependencies for a given object. So for this banded report, we can see everywhere it's referenced. So it's referenced by certain other objects. And we can see if another report references it, or if a shortcut references it, or if a drill through references it. So here we can see that there's a shortcut, a view, and another report that all reference this banded report. If we pop this back out for a second, we can see that the banded report references this package, and I can actually expand that and see everything that references that particular package. You can walk up and down this reference hierarchy as much as you want, kind of understand the relationship between your objects in Cognos. We also ship a Cognos package instead of reports that you can do your own reporting on. So all the data, all the version history, all the testing information, as well as this reference information is exposed via our Cognos package and reports, and you can kind of do a lot of analysis on your system using those reports. I suspect our test cases are now completed, and in fact they are. So we can see that the changes that we made did in fact cause this object to go to the successful state, which is ultimately what we want for all of our objects within Cognos. If we look at the revision history, we'll see there's another revision, today's date, myself, the author, and my comment here. We can do all the same diffing we did before. We could revert this in the same way that we did the folder a minute ago if we wanted to roll that change back, or we can deploy the change. So we could select the most recent revision of this report or any previous revision of this report. So we could come down and pick revision 5 and ultimately deploy that from dev to test using the promote capability. All we have to do is click the promote and ultimately select the environment that we want to promote to, and click the run, and that will promote it from one environment to the other. I like to show this single object promotion because, you know, that's something that you can't do easily with Cognos out of the box. Cognos out of the box, you have to export an entire folder, and you can only export the latest content of that's in Cognos because that's all they store. Here you can pick any version of an object and move that to any other environment. And a lot of times people kind of work around these limitations by making a lot of copies of their objects, but that's a lot of manual processing, making a lot of copies, and plus just tracking that is kind of a nightmare. So here you can move the object straight across, and you can move any version of those objects that you want to move. So you can do single objects like the report or the folder, or you can do sets of objects. I'm actually going to cancel out of this, and we'll take a look in a minute of creating a label. You can see some of these revisions are associated with a label, and we'll do that in a moment and move a package and a set of reports across from dev to test. There's a few other actions over here. You can view the outputs associated with any revision. You can open any old revision in Report Studio. You can run an old revision, maybe if you're considering reverting to it or something, you may want to do that. Or you can also view any revision that we have under version control, which will show you all of the properties that Cognos has stored about that particular object, which can be very useful in a number of different debugging situations. Okay. All right. Let me close out of this. I'll show you a couple of other things here in the version control. You know, we talked a lot about our testing, and one of the things that we're stressing in testing is, you know, the completeness of it. You can test all the objects and all the properties of those objects really in any environment that you want to test them. The same is true for the version control. We version all the objects, all the object properties. So, you know, that's, you know, all the objects, reports, queries, jobs, data sources, all the properties, names, descriptions, tooltips, but also all the actions. So you edit something in the studio, or if you edit it in Cognos Connection, we will have that under version control. So, in way of example, let's say we take a couple of objects and we cut them, and we paste them up into this test folder, and we look at that, you will see that we record that move, where it was moved from. It's not an add and delete, it's a simple move. And you can revert that exactly like I did with the folder a minute ago, and go ahead and run it, and it will put that object back into the prior location. You technically do have the option to get down to the property level where you could revert the spec and not the path, or the path and not the spec, but we rolled the whole object back. And if I refresh, you'll see that the query stayed, but the report then did move back up into its prior location. Likewise, if somebody deletes content, so we've been working in this sales folder a good bit. Let's take a look at this HR folder. What if we were to delete that entire folder and everything that's in it? And people do either intentionally or accidentally delete content from Cognos, and there's no native ability in Cognos to recover content. If you delete something in Cognos, it's simply gone. Your only hope for recovering it is to roll back the content store database and hope that you can get it out of there if you have a backup of your content store database. But certainly that's a great deal of effort and not really practical in a number of situations where you have a very large shared environment. You simply can't revert to the state you were at midnight because there were a lot of changes after midnight, and you have to keep those. So we do provide the ability to recover deleted objects. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this project. You see the sales folder here, and if I click Show Hidden, you will then see that HR folder come into view. I can select it and ultimately select it and all of the content that was included in it and roll that back and put it into the prior location. So, there's a record of who deleted it, when they deleted it, and we can recover it very simply. This obviously handles the case of people accidentally deleting things, intentionally deleting things, but it also just gives you a lot of freedom in terms of being able to clean up your content store. And if you ever need the content again, then you can get it back. So let's go ahead and refresh, and we'll see we've got the HR folder and the contents of that folder. Okay. So that's a fair amount of the version control functionality. But let me go ahead and show some of the other object types. I know I've mentioned we versioned these objects, but I'd like to go ahead and show that to you. And so we can see that we can version all of the things in the My Folders area. So if people have content in the My Folders area and you want to version it, you can. Certainly that's configurable. We can version everything that's in the Cognos namespace. So this includes data sources that you may have defined. It also includes the groups and roles. So if somebody comes in and gives everyone server administrator access, then you're going to have a record of that, who did it, when it was done. You can diff it, so you can see that everyone is a member here, and you can also roll that back or promote it, which again, promotion is the idea of moving content from one environment to the other, and you can do that, which if you think about it a minute, you can only export content from the content store. You can only export directory content if you export the entire content store. You can promote this content. We also version the things that are in the configuration area. So if somebody comes in and edits the batch report service on a particular dispatcher, then you can see when that was done, who did it, and you've got the exact same functionality in terms of being able to revert that or promote that content. Okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at Well, I guess the one other thing I will tell you about, and then we'll do a promotion, is that we have the ability to version things that are not in the content store. So, you know, you can version framework manager files or transformer files that are not in part of your content store. They're simply files on disk that you may want to be able to version. That works real simply. You right-click, you say Checkout, which gives you the same lock similar to what we got a moment ago in Report Studio. It'll actually zip the content, bring it local to your disk. You can edit it, and then you come back and right-click and check in, which will send that content back to the server and be versioned by Motio. All right? So let's go ahead and talk about sort of the last feature area, which is our deployment capability. We showed that a moment ago, and we talked about it with respect to an individual object. And we said that you can pick a single object like this banded report, and you can promote it. You can actually promote any version of that object, which is a feature that you don't really have outside of MotioCI. You can take this entire sales folder and promote it, a particular version of it, and the contents of it. But, you know, we recommend the use of labels, and so to kind of mark your changes and bundle them into a release. And you have a couple different workflows that are available to you with labels, but it's actually very easy to create a label. You can right-click on a folder and say Label and give that a name. So maybe you want to say Release 6.0. You've got several different options for creating a label. You know, maybe you only want to label the things that have changed in the last month or something like that. Let's go ahead and just label all of the content. So we're going to label this package and everything that's in it. We can come down and look at our label, and we can actually view, and we can see exactly what objects are a part of the label and what versions of the objects are a part of the label. And then when we're ready to do our deployment from dev to test, we simply right-click and say Promote and pick the environment that we want to promote to and enter our credentials for that environment. And we have a few options here, and some of the options concern something called impact analysis. So we have an option to run an impact analysis before we do the promotion. And what that means is it says, well, you know, you'd like to certify or verify that the things that you're going to promote, the changes that you want to make, that they don't break anything in the target environment. You know, it's all well and fine to test something in, you know, say dev or QA, but maybe you want to test it in the ultimate target, but you don't want to obviously override your live content. You want to test it prior to committing to that promotion. And so that's what we allow as part of the impact analysis. What we do is we take the objects, we put them into a temp folder, and we run all of the unit tests against them. And we actually run the unit test against the objects in the temp folder, and we run them against your current live content, compare the differences, compare the run times, compare the outputs, let you know where there's any potential problems. And it's kind of nice in the way that it uses dependencies. So let's say you have a package that you're going to deploy, and maybe you have some ad hoc reports that are in your production environment that are against that package that don't even exist in your test environment. Well, it'll actually go find all of those ad hoc reports and copy those up into the stage location and correct the package reference so that it points to the new package and test them. So it can make sure those aren't broken as well. So, you know, that's a really neat feature, although it does take a while to run because it has to execute all of the different test cases. So I'm not going to execute it here, but I do want you to be aware of it. Another thing to notice, and this is something that is new in the product as of our last release, is the ability to schedule a deployment. So, you know, it's not uncommon that people want to deploy, say, you know, in the middle of the night, but they don't want to wait up to actually do the deployment. Well, you can click the schedule and pick the date and time when you want the deployment to be done, and then it will be done at that time. But I'm going to go ahead and just run this deployment straight away. So I'm moving the content from dev to test, and we can see that here. It's going to go ahead and run my deployment. So this is analogous to doing the export-import in Cognos. You know, if you all are Cognos administrators, you've been through this. You go create the export job in Cognos. You run that export job. That produces a zip file on the server. You go move that zip file over to the new server. You create an import job. You run that import job in order to get your content moved into the new server. There are several advantages of using MotioCI promotion over that standard technique. I think one is it's simply faster and easier, and by virtue of that, it's less mistake prone. So that's, of course, an advantage. But other things, as we've already seen, you can take individual objects, individual versions of those objects. We can even do individual properties. So you can be much, much more surgical in your deployments and only deploy the exact things that you want to deploy. That's kind of a huge advantage. It's also fully traceable. So anytime there's a deployment, there's a record of it. And you can tell when it was done, who did the deployment. You can tell exactly what objects were included in that deployment, what versions of those objects. You can see if they changed. You know, we went ahead, you'll remember when we created the label, we selected all of the objects, whether they had changed or not. Well, when we did our deployment, some of the objects have changed, some of them haven't. We know exactly which objects have changed. We can diff those straight away. And another huge advantage is that if anything goes wrong, you know, we push something to test or we push something to production and we decide that that should not have gone, there's some sort of defect with it, we need to get back to the old state and quickly, we simply click undo the deployment and instantly all of those changes will be rolled back and we'll be at the state we were at prior to the deployment. And so that's kind of a huge feature and a huge advantage to this style of deployment. Another thing is, of course, you don't have to have access to the physical hardware, and so you may be able to change up your workflow a little bit in terms of who actually does the promotion. And we have some roles around that, so you can control who can create a label, who can update a label, who can promote a label, and so ultimately kind of define a little bit different workflow for how you want to do your deployments. All right. So I think we've covered the product pretty well, but I did want to show you one additional thing. You know, we sort of started the presentation today, and I was showing you these different test cases that were failing. And you may have wondered, and you said, well, you know, how do we get test cases? Because, I mean, certainly it's great to have automated testing. I think there's pretty obvious business value in being able to automate your testing. But one of the questions that invariably comes up is, well, how much effort is it to actually go in and define test cases for all my objects? Well, you can do that manually. So you can go in, pick a folder, and add a test case for that folder, or pick a report and add a test case for that report. So you can manually define test cases, test scenarios for each of your objects. You can pick an existing test case and clone it. Maybe there's only slight differences in the test that you want to do. But we provide a wizard that will actually generate test cases for you and get you up and running with a viable set of test cases day one. And so I wanted to go ahead and show that to you. And I want to create a new project. And we've really enhanced, you know, we've had auto generation of test cases for some time in prior releases of the product, but we've actually enhanced that feature quite a lot. And I think you all are going to be impressed with the type of capability we have for generating test cases. So first thing I've got to do is define a project. And really a project is nothing more than a set of paths, a slice of your content store, if you will, that you want to consider and group together. We can define those paths manually, or we can do it automatically. I'm going to go ahead and do the automatic selection. So I'm going to pick a package, and the system will actually find all the dependencies of that package and make that part of my project. So we see here that I get the package, I get the data source, and I get a folder. What this means is that there's one or more objects, one or more reports, queries, analysis in this folder that utilize that particular package. Therefore, the folder has been added to my project. And then I generate my test cases. I can generate test cases on all of the executable types, like queries and active reports and reports. We'll also generate test cases on non-executable types. The next thing is to specify how we want to get our parameters. You know, we've been doing testing in this product since 2006, and one of the challenges that we run across very often is getting people to set up realistic sets of parameters. You know, people go in kind of just randomly pick a couple of things. Well, you want to get things that the users actually use when they run a report or a query. And so we actually can go in and import those from the content store. So if there's any saved views or outputs in the content store, we'll go ahead and import those and create test cases from them. And you can create any number of test cases for a given object. So let's say for a report, I may want to create 5 different scenarios that I want to test. So we'll go out there, we'll look for saved views, saved outputs, sort of randomly select those and pull back 5 to make test cases out of. And of course, then you can specify the various output formats that you want generated when you do the test cases. And then you specify what are the assertions that you want as part of your testing. And assertions are a concept you may or may not be familiar with. If you've done anything with other automated testing systems, you may have seen it. But the way to define it is, you know, that is your expectation, or your assertion is things that should be true. This report should run in less than a minute. It should have these particular data items on it. It should, you know, meet certain standards, certain corporate standards. And so we have a series of assertions that we provide out of the box, and you can see, you know, kind of the categories of assertions that we have, from corporate standards, you know, things like branding that you may want to enforce, allowed colors, allowed fonts. We certainly do data validation. So we showed a moment ago, we had that output stability assertion, or you can do an output comparison and compare outputs between 2 Cognos environments. We can also use column validation or other things to use the SQL query like I was talking about. So we have a number of options for data validation. We can do some monitoring and documentation of your various objects. We can look at the performance of your objects. So one of the most common things to do is the execution time stability, where you'll compare the execution time of the objects against a baseline, but you can also do absolute times or compare to other objects. So maybe you want to compare the execution times in dev to the execution times in production, or something of that nature. The last area down here is the proven practices. And these are just different things that, you know, that are good practices that you may or may not want to enforce in your environment, and you can decide whether or not you want to enforce them. So I kind of wanted to show you these and let you see the different categories and different things that I have set up in my environment. But one of the things I want to tell you about is that this is not by any means the limit of what you can test. These are examples of what you can test. We actually ship something called Assertion Studio that allows you to author your own assertions. So you can go out and author your own assertion type. You can make it part of this wizard and you know, be able to test something that we didn't initially think about you testing. So, you know, you really can test every object type and every property of that object, every output, all the different things within your Cognos environment. So let's go ahead and just generate our test cases. And then this will generate a certain number of test cases. And then the last step is scheduling of our test cases. And so you typically want your test cases to run, you know, fairly frequently. And you have a few different scripts for how we are able to execute the test cases. We have a nightly script, which will run all of the objects. Technically speaking, it doesn't run all of the test cases. it runs all the ones that it should run. Because things like a report, you want to run all the test cases on it even if the report didn't change. But a folder, you only need to run the test case on a folder if in fact the folder changed, because it doesn't have other dependencies. So we're actually fairly intelligent about what we run, and you can schedule the ones that have changed or failed to run really frequently. Like you may want those to run every couple of hours and ultimately email you if there's some problem. And hit next, and then the entire project is generated. And so here I've got a project that's very similar to the ones that I was showing you at the start of the demo. So just a few clicks through the wizard and I'm able to generate an entire set of test cases that can do a great deal of validation within my environment without a lot of manual interaction. And certainly I can go in and customize those test cases afterwards and change them and rearrange them, but we're able to generate them and get started straight away.